ClandesTime.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to ClandesTime. I am Tom Secker, coming to you from the grassy knolls of North Yorkshire, and this is episode 64, Kingsman.
Huge IQ, great performance at school, but you gave up. Drugs, petty crime, you never had a job. It set you on a certain path, but you needn't stay on it. Who are you? The man who got you released.
I've never met a tailor before, but I know you ain't one.
Come with me. What do you see? I see a young man with potential. Pull the hook on your left.
Oh, yes. Very nice. What does this do? Electrocute you?
Don't be ridiculous. It's a hand grenade.
Shut up. That is sick.
We are an independent international intelligence agency operating at the highest level of discretion. The Kingsman agents are the new knights.
You are about to embark on the most dangerous job interview in the world.
Felt sorry for the boy, did you? He will find this humiliating.
He's as much Kingsman material as any of them.
We're here to enhance your skills, test you to the limit. You need to solve problems under pressure, like what to do when one of your group has no parachute.
Interested? Manners maketh man.
I have trouble understanding you people sometimes. You all talk so funny.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And what about them? What makes them so special?
Put it back.
So today I'm joined by my good friend Adam of Themes and Memes to discuss the movie Kingsman. And this is a action comedy set in the world of gentlemen spies. But beneath that exterior there is ultraviolence, a range of elitist eugenicist philosophies, a rather sickening approach to sex, love and relationships, and a whole lot more. So much, in fact, that even in this in-depth conversation we failed to cover it all. But we did also find the time to look at the question of state sponsorship of the film, including the results of a FOIA request that I put in with the Metropolitan Police. So, here we are. Hello Adam, and welcome back to ClandesTime. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show, and this film in particular is one hell of a good choice. So, let me start actually by saying a big thank you to you for this recommendation. I think this is going to be a really fascinating conversation about this one, and I hope you're doing well.
Yeah, thank you. It's nice to be on. It feels like it's been a while. So yeah, it's good to be back, and as you say, a very, very interesting film. Quite a confusing film as well. The listeners might be interested to know that we've actually already recorded an hour on this, which we did a few months ago. But due to the complexity and all the confusion going on with this film, we decided to give it another crack because there's so many different angles to look at, and hopefully we managed to cover everything we need to in this episode. But I'm looking forward to it.
And we are, of course, talking about Kingsman, which, if people haven't seen, they really should see, I think, before listening to the rest of this conversation, because there's a lot in this film, and I imagine that a lot of what we're going to be talking about will not make that much sense if you haven't watched the film. Because there's just, I mean, to be honest, there's just too much for us to recap everything and explain all the background plot and blah, blah, blah. So it will just make a lot more sense and be easier if you do go and watch the film before proceeding. But I know some of you won't, so that's that. Summarizing this movie is virtually impossible, because, like I say, there's just too much there. But in essence, Kingsman is a high-tech action comedy in which a chav, a young working-class British lad, is recruited into this upper-class secret society, parallel intelligence service, a bit of a mixture of both. And then he and the others foil this plot to wipe out humankind. And that part, indeed, the whole thing is a relatively well-trodden path. It's a relatively well-established story, I think, but there's quite a number of new twists in this one. I mean, this one, we should also say, this film was delayed in coming out, and like you say, we did record an hour or so, possibly more, a couple of months back, but we didn't really feel we did justice to what we were thinking about this film, so we had another go at it. This is the second go at it. But before we get into the core questions, Adam, you recommended this one to me some time ago. I mean, I think it was months before it came out. It must have been on the basis of a teaser trailer or whatever. But why?
Yeah, well, again, there was a big delay in between the time that the trailer was released and the film actually came out. And I actually think it was more than just a few months. I think, from memory, I think it may have been almost, I don't know, I want to say a year, perhaps not so much, maybe 9 months, something like that, because there was a few, trailers doing the round on YouTube, and I just sort of stumbled across it randomly from memory. And then waited for it to come out. It didn't come out. Didn't know what was going on with it. Forgot about it. And then it just sort of popped up, I don't know, again, so maybe 9 months later. And so I think it was when it actually, I think not too long before it came out, that I decided to send the trailer your way and see what you thought about it, purely because it was, a spy film, and that's what, you're interested in. And I thought it would be something that would be interesting to cover in that regard, but not only because of that, but because even just from the trailer, it seemed like a different type of film. And I think qualifying that and expanding on that is quite a difficult thing to do, because the ways in which they're different are so numerous and confusing that, I think all we can do is talk about it, and see where we end up. But, it definitely struck me as something that was very different, something that was very intense, and something which that appeared to be pretty crammed full of content and interesting ideas that are worthy of scrutiny. So I guess that's how that came about, really.
Well, I mean, just on the back of that, when you first saw the film, long before I saw it, well, maybe not that long, but a while before I saw it, your email to me said that your first major thought, or your kind of central feeling about the film, was that it was a major upgrade. And I do think it's a very dense film. It's a film that has so much thrown in there in terms of ideas, dialogue, technology, character types, motivations, story arcs, all the rest of it. There's a lot in there. It doesn't really give you a moment ever in the film to stop and think, what's going on here? And how am I responding to it? And I know a lot of film goers never feel that way about films, but even if it's happening subconsciously, some films give you periods of rest where you kind of get a chance to take it all in and before it really moves on. This film, nothing like that. Is that what you meant by a major upgrade? Just the sheer pace and density of the film?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think the pace and the density, and I think density is probably the best way to describe it, because that's what it is. It's extremely dense, and as you say, you don't have a moment to catch your breath or to really ponder what's happening, because it's just bang, 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 bang the whole way through. But also because it's basically a film which seems to be, in terms of the aesthetic of the film, in that it's very brightly colored. There's a lot of visual stimuli. There's a lot of action. It seems to be marketed at a younger audience, and if not children, I would probably say young adults, teenagers, that kind of age bracket. But at the same time, it seems to also contain quite a lot of little nuggets and other pieces of content, all the way from the dialogue to some of the underlying sort of philosophical themes that one would typically expect from a more of an adult film, more of an R-rated film, if you will. A lot of the content is, I would argue that it is not really suitable for children.
It certainly isn't.
Probably not very healthy for children. And yet at the same time, it really does seem to be marketed to children. I mean, one of the ways I sort of described it, I think on one occasion, was that it was like a sort of a futurist, or, a sort of a contemporary / futuristic sort of chav version of Harry Potter,
No, it does have that all those elements to it, in terms of the character that we're most clearly supposed to be identifying with is Eggsy, the central character, the young lad who is inducted into this secret world, and as he is, we follow him through this journey, and we want him to succeed. And yet, in some respects, you could say there are elements of this in the Harry Potter films, but certainly in this one, his actual journey, as it were, is quite a brutally violent one. It's one that means it has enormous implications, whether he succeeds or fails, although that's never dwelt upon. Like everything in this film, that's never dwelt upon. Is the actual scale of the jeopardy around all of this is enormous, and the actual nature of the scenario, which we'll get into in a bit, is horrifying. And so would you even get these in a Bond film, some of these things?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, it's beyond that. I think they probably, they're taking, a fair bit from Bond films. The music, some of the kind of, the twee, old-fashioned, classic British spy motifs,
Yeah, the gentleman spy, all of that.
Yes, all that stuff, yeah. But, I mean, in terms of the, again, some of the content, some of the underlying themes, it is beyond what you would see in a sort of legitimate adult spy film like Bond.
But, I want to introduce a slightly different perspective on all of this to what you're saying, and that is that I think it's not really a spy film. It
really,
looks like a spy film, has a lot of the visual motifs of a spy film. It looks like every other spy film ever made, but there isn't much in the way of surveillance. There isn't much in the way of recruiting agents. There isn't any real double crossing, or that's not really what the plot is about.
There's not really any espionage, is there?
No. The only part where we do get to see espionage, where we do get to see that sort of thing, is in the sequence of the training tests and the initiations that these Kingsman candidates are going through. And so I thought, well, that's where we should pick up, really, because the opening of the film, basically, Eggsy is growing up in a pretty terrible situation, very poor family. His dad has died because his dad was a Kingsman and he gets killed in an operation. His mum has now moved in with this total loser, idiot, violent, abusive twat of a guy. It's not very, very good. So obviously we sympathise with him. We want to see this poor lad succeed. He gets recruited by Colin Firth's character into the testing process. He's basically trying to qualify for the Kingsman. Which sequence should we pick up? One of the bits that you've always highlighted, and you're absolutely right to do this, Adam, is when he first takes Eggsy into the tailors, and they go down in the secret elevator, and they're going down in this really long elevator shaft, and the whole room is sort of sinking down James Bond style to get to the secret train and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And he's telling him, Colin Firth's character is telling him the backstory of Kingsman, of what they are. And he describes them as an international intelligence organization that exists parallel to government ones and in some ways above government ones. And he describes this story of, after World War I, there was all of these people were dead so that all of these rich people didn't have their sons and daughters to give money to. And so all of this money was going uninherited and got funneled into this supposedly benevolent, peaceful, life-loving secret society. And out of that grew this intelligence organization. And, aside from the horrors of painting that sort of extremely aristocratic British secret society as some kind of force for peace and good in the world, there's one line in that bit that really, it not just makes me laugh, but I also think gets to the heart of what, in some ways, this film is all about. And it's when Colin Firth has laid all of this out to him, and the lift is still going down, it's still sinking into the ground, and Eggsy sort of goes, "How deep does this fucking thing go?" And Colin Firth replies, "Deep enough." And he's not just talking about the elevator, of course. He's asking, how deep does the secret society go? And the answer is, deep enough. Is it not?
Yeah. I mean, they're absolutely right. You know what? I had not actually thought about that particular bit of dialogue just there, but that makes complete sense, yeah. Double meaning, yeah.
Because you know what I mean? The whole thing is selling you this idea of a secret society. It's, I mean, you one of the reasons why we pick a lot of the films that we like to talk about is this engagement with or use of conspiratorial themes and ideas, and there's a fair few of those in this. But even the overriding story, right? Is it not about selling you the notion of an aristocratic British secret society that's operating internationally almost in total secrecy and doing all sorts of things? Is it not trying to sell you and promote that idea to you, in fact?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, especially with that bit of dialogue you're just referencing there when he's, you know, going down the lift and he's giving him the rundown of, you know, the origins of the Kingsmen and how they came to be and how they operate at the highest levels of discretion and all this stuff. And, yeah, I mean, it gives him the sales pitch about how necessary they are and how absolutely benevolent they are. And, you know, again, I think they even... I can't remember what the actual script was, but it was something like, "Oh, we're a force for good in the world." Maintaining peace and security and all the usual nonsense that security agencies justify their existence with. So yeah, that's absolutely going on.
But I think so. Anyway, he gets into the training and testing period, and they go through a number of bizarre, in some cases, initiations. Some of them are rather classic, like the skydiving one. There's always got to be a skydiving sequence in these films, it seems, these days. But there was two we really wanted to focus on, and that was the seduction task and the bit where he has to shoot the dog. So, well, I mean, let's take them in that order. So, I'll explain the scenario, and then you can say what you make of this, because it really is... The implications are quite disgusting. Essentially, when it gets down to just 3 candidates left, there's 2 guys, Eggsy, there's a posh guy and a posh girl, and they are given a task to go out to a nightclub and seduce, pull, whatever you want to call it, basically get this girl home and sleep with her. And they're all given the same target, the same girl, right? When they get there, they're all hitting on this girl and trying a series of different sort of bizarre chat-up techniques, and all downgrading and insulting each other's chat-up techniques and fighting and competing with one another. And then the young lady says, "Excuse me, I'm just going to go off to the bathroom." And then the barman, or a waiter or whatever, comes up and explains to them, there's an even easier way to get someone into bed. And then he says, "Rohypnol." And then they all pass out, because obviously their drinks have been drugged with Rohypnol or something. And then they're taken off to some other initiation and test, because it's all actually a setup for that. But what's the underlying message here? To an audience, like you say, of young adults, maybe mid to late teens as well? Because the character of Eggsy, he's supposed to be about 20, but he looks younger, at least in the initial part of the film. He looks younger than that. They've made him look younger than that. So that's clearly who they're aiming at. But in this... Again, a scene that's relatively innocuous in terms of the overall plot and everything in the film, but it's quite horrible, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's this, again, we've just got this whole idea that the ends justify the means, and that, doing something which would usually be seen as morally bankrupt, is justified in the context of, achieving an objective. And so, there's a big emphasis in that particular scene where, I think as it's being explained to them what the task is in terms of going to the bar and picking up the girl, they're told to use an LP, actually.
Yeah.
And, I found that to be very, very interesting because, I mean, it's something that is, quite a morally questionable, way of dealing with people in terms of, using applied behavioral psychology to get somebody to do something that they wouldn't normally do. But of course, it's being presented in this film as something which is fairly innocuous. It's just whatever. Just go and do it. If it works, do it. And so, along with the whole, NLP thing, you've also got the Rohypnol thing. And although that's not, they're not shown to be using that themselves. As you say, they have it used upon them rather than them using it. It's still something which is raised. And I think we can probably expand on this a little bit later on. But this is part of a relatively small but quite significant thread which runs throughout the film to do with, I guess, relationships and
sex,
sort of,
particularly,
and sex, yeah. Because there are sort of a few references to sex and relationships in this film, but all of which have a very, very common theme. And in this particular scene, it's NLP and Rohypnol, pushing the idea that the most efficient, the easiest, the most desirable, therefore, way of getting somebody to sleep with you is to either use applied behavioral psychology and essentially put them into some kind of trance, or simply use drugs. And so again, we've got these messages being sent to a fairly young audience, which it's pretty reprehensible when you think about it.
It's also interesting, somewhat, that I guess that they give the young girl, the young lady who's trying to get into Kingsman, the candidate, they give her the same target. So they're all trying to sleep with this one girl. Because I always found it quite striking that in this film, all of the candidates that are trying to get into Kingsman are men, except for the one character, but she's possibly even posher than any of the guys are. So you have this flavor of a kind of liberal progressivist kind of thing where they do have a female candidate in there, but she still represents the same old establishment. And that's what's, I think, is going on in all of the whole film, really, is that, like, you have a working class central character, a chav, a guy who he's unemployed, he's underachieving, not really going anywhere with his life, someone who you would sympathize with to some extent, but who is very much, like I say, working class. But yet, the society that he moves into, and the things that are desirable to him, and the things that give him a sense of accomplishment, and obviously we're riding along with that, and therefore to give us that sense of this is a good outcome, are all posh, old British establishment things. And so it actually, in a film that seems to be trying to send up or take the piss out of that kind of old British spy thing, the gentleman spy, it actually ends up reinforcing most of that, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Whether or not they take the piss out of it, at least to start with, is really not so important as the ultimate conclusion they leave you with. And despite the various bits of dialogue and the debates that Eggsy has with the Colin Firth character about, not being born with a silver spoon up his ass, and that's the reason why he, was sort of underachieving before he was recruited into Kingsman, and all of these sort of, age-old class debates and class war, sort of things going on. We're still essentially left with the impression that it is more desirable in terms of your values and your identity, etc., to be an aristocrat. And that the ideal scenario for a person who is in Eggsy's position would be to seek that, to become that, and that in doing so, he's validating his existence. He's achieved success. So again, we see this in a lot of films, really. They will appear to be mocking something initially, but the ultimate conclusion they leave you with throughout the film and towards the end of a film can really send you the opposite message. And that the ideals of Kingsman, the aristocratic culture, the aristocratic philosophy, is more desirable. It's more ideal. It's more appealing. It's something that Eggsy has done well to turn himself into one of these people, essentially.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's perhaps the key to the film, is that you're completely bombarded throughout this film with all kinds of different ideas and perspectives and values and beliefs. It's a real melange of, you might even call it moral relativism. But nonetheless, there is still this underlying morality. There is still this underlying value set of upper class English twats. That, and there's quite a few illustrations of this, but there's a couple that I want to pick up on. The first is, of course, that the Kingsman group themselves, they all have code names, because, of course, they're spies. But they take their code names from the Knights of the Round Table, from Arthurian legend. They're all called Galahad, Lancelot, whatever. In the opening scene, we see them attacking this, just some group of unknown Arabs, really, somewhere in the Middle East. That's all it says on the screen, is just Middle East, 1997. You're never told where this is, or who these people are, or why this is happening. It's just, oh, they're flying in there to kill some Arabs. And so in all of this, you do have connotations of the Crusades, I guess. Certainly the Knights of Malta. And if you think, again, in terms of conspiracy culture, you have the modern-day Round Table organizations, the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations. You have the Royal Institute for International Affairs, Chatham House. And there are elements in the Kingsman, in this organization, that are evoking all of those, I feel. And not just in the old English sense, but also in the little bit of conspiracy culture for you sense. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely definitely the case. And I mean, I think there are plenty of examples throughout this film where they are, again, referencing and just taking little nuggets from that world, you know, for all the motifs from alternative media culture and conspiracy culture. And that would be, you know, a prime example of that. And I think, once again, as we see with so many other films, they're putting that little bit of spin on it, where they're taking the whole concept of a round table organization, of a secret society, of some, you know, group that's very, very powerful, that exists pretty much under the radar for all intents and purposes, and portraying them as being heroic, as being necessary, as being noble, you know, and so...
And as being cool, I would say.
Oh, well, that's
perhaps the most important element.
The most important, yeah. As being cool is... Yeah, something you'd want to join, something that we look up to, something that we would love to be a part of, you know?
Something that we're glad exists because it seems sexy and exciting and entertaining.
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But again, bringing us back to this very conservative Old English mentality. In most comic book action movies, the sorts of films that you get quite a lot of these days, the token black character, or the token Arab or Asian character, is usually a sidekick, right? You usually have the white male hero, Batman, Iron Man, whoever, and then he's got either a black male sidekick or an Asian or Arab female sidekick, or assistant of some sort. But in this film, it's proper old school. It's British Empire stuff. The villain is black. The only real black character in the whole thing is the villain, and the only Arab or Asian-looking character is the female henchman of the villain. Henchwoman, sorry, of the villain.
Yeah.
So this is, again, running against a trend in these sorts of films. And what are they doing with this? It's like, once again, you have this quasi-progressive philosophy going on in like Batman and Iron Man and what have you. But this one, it's right back to where we were 300 years ago.
Yeah. It's an interesting question, and I have thought about it, and I'm not sure I've come to any real conclusion about that, because it doesn't, as you say, it doesn't really seem to fit the bill. You know, I mean, almost all films these days, if it's not mandatory, it's more or less so in practical terms, to have all those equality and diversity boxes ticked, you know, to make sure that you're including people of most different racial groups. You know, you've got a white person, you've got a black person, Asian, as you say, and of course you've got to have a woman in there as well, a female at some point. But in this film, you know, as you said, we've got the Samuel L. Jackson character, the eccentric villain, being the only black person from memory. I don't think there were any other black people in the film. And
certainly not significant characters anyway. Yeah.
And then the Asian female sidekick with the weird Blade Runner prosthetic things, from like the Paralympics or something, you know, which is kind of weird. It doesn't quite seem to stack up, because it does, as you say, harken back in many ways to this kind of old school institutional racism thing, you know, in terms of, the only black person in the film being the villain, the only Asian person in the film being psychically the villain, and all the heroes, all the saviors being white and English.
And
mostly upper class.
With the exception of the one working class lad who somehow makes it into the posh group. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But you brought it up. You have this henchwoman character has these. Yeah, they're like the Oscar Pistorius Blade Runner type.
That's the one, yeah.
Or whatever other athlete you care to mention who runs with prosthetic runner feet. But the twist on that is that these things are incredibly sharp, and they enable her to move sort of very, very quickly, very athletically as well. And it's quite brutal the way she uses these. I mean, this is, I don't think, a character that we're supposed to like. I mean, she's supposed to be exciting, maybe, but I found her really quite unpleasant as a character, and I don't think that's just me. I found most of this film unpleasant.
Yeah, we've seen this there's a few films that I've seen this in where you've got some kind of female assassin character who's fantastic with some kind of weapon of some sort, you know? And as you said, the scenario with these prosthetic blades that she's got for legs, so that they're basically like knives, and she's doing all these backflips and fancy 360 kicks and all this stuff, and just slicing people up left, right, and center. Not a very nice character. Obviously she's the villain's sidekick. She's not supposed to be nice per se, but there's something a little bit more to her in that sense. And again, it's something I have seen in other films. So I'm not quite sure what to make of that. But again, that just comes back down to the whole ultra-violence thing in the film, which we talked about in our first discussion, and that it was really quite gratuitous.
Well, the way that character is introduced is by she slices one of the Kingsmen in half. He's breaking into this house in the snowy mountains of Argentina for some reason to rescue someone, and she sneaks up behind him and literally from the head down uses one of these blade feet things to slice him completely in half. And that's, like you say, that sort of violence, that sort of, not just in terms of it being horrible, but in terms of it being so kind of brutal and clinical. It's over in a second. She just kills him and slices him in half completely. Is that something that should really be in a film that's aimed clearly at teenagers and obviously is going to get an audience younger than that as well?
It's
troubling.
I don't think so. It is troubling, and it's almost like Quentin Tarantino violence, with perhaps a bit more clinical. But yeah, I think the key with this is that the violence is presented in such a way, along with all the music is fairly lighthearted. There's lots of comedic quips. The violence is also enhanced with CGI, so everything's a lot faster than it would have been in reality, and a lot more sort of perfect and choreographed. And very sensationalistic with very little basis in real reality or real fighting dynamics. But I think the way that all this is put across is done so to, I guess, to make it more palatable for a younger audience, and to, although we are seeing graphic violence, I think the whole aesthetic of all of that is done in such a way that it's not quite as disturbing as you might think it would be. And I think it probably, I don't know, I can imagine a lot of parents would probably look at a lot of this violence and go, well, this is just so over the top, and it's done in such a light-hearted, comedic, blasé fashion.
Almost absurd fashion.
Absurd, yeah, that it's not really disturbing. And I would, of course, disagree with that, and I would say that the violence is the violence. It is what it is, but I would imagine, again, that a lot of people probably not seeing it for what it really truly was because of the particular way in which it's presented as being, completely over the top and implausible. And so, I think we see a lot of that in this film and a lot of other respects as well. But it is, as you say, it is quite disturbing. And the film is replete with it as well. It never ends,
No, sure. I mean, there are several major sequences, I would say, of this. It's what I called cartoon violence made flesh. It's like watching, I don't know, Tom and Jerry, but it's people actually doing this stuff to each other. There's several bits of it, and it almost, it builds actually throughout the film. The first sequence is, like I say, when this Kingsman, who I can't even remember his name, breaks into this house, and he kills a bunch of henchmen first in quite brutal fashion. But there isn't a lot of blood, there isn't a lot of gore, there is certainly no lingering on the corpse as it lies on the floor, spitting blood out or anything. It's all very, and I think that's partly how they got it past the censorship, is because there's no gore, really, and there isn't much suffering. It's all very quick. So that's one way, I think, that they got it past the censor. There may have been...
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that was a big part of it. And there's the sort of the grand finale, the epic battle at the end, or I suppose the final sequence in the film, and we'll get to this, is absolutely a case of this. Where we've got, the whole issue with all these people's heads exploding, and we can maybe try and explain how that comes about. But we see fireworks rather than gore. We see fireworks.
Yeah, you're right. Well, what I was going to say is, in between those, the second major scene of violence is in the church, where the evil guy, Samuel L. Jackson, is testing out this technology that we'll get onto in a moment. And basically sends all of these people in the church crazy, and it's like a riot, and they all kill each other. And it's maybe 3 or 4 minutes of prolonged, very fast-paced violence. But once again, it never lingers. It never stops to really show you the impact and the consequences of this. And I guess that's once again how they got away with it. But then the third scene of ultra-violence, they surpass themselves. There's a situation right at the end where Eggsy is trying to break into the mountain lair of the big evil villain, and all of his people, all of the villain's people, have got these implants in their neck so that they are immune, I guess, to the effects of this rage noise thing that he's created, where basically people's mobile phones go off playing this tone, and it sends everyone into a rage and everyone kills each other. And all of his people, all of his soldiers, and all of the elite people, rich people and so on that he's collected in his mountain lair to keep them away from this, they've all got these implants in their neck. And Eggsy is fighting his way in, and he gets cornered. He's surrounded by guys with guns, and his mate back on the plane is also having a, rocket launcher slowly but surely aimed at him. And it all looks like it's going wrong for a moment. It's the only real moment in the whole film where there's anything at stake, where you think, actually, maybe this isn't going to happen after all. Up until that point, everything really goes Eggsy's way in some way or another, but that's the one point that you think, oh, he's actually at risk here. So what they do is, Kingsman guy back on the plane, I can't remember his name, hacks into the system and makes all of these implants blow up, because that's a kind of fail-safe that's built into them, is that you can blow them up and kill the person if you need to. And we get this sequence to the musical backdrop of, I think it's Land of Hope and Glory, of all things. And
yes, it is.
And all of these people's heads either explode or burst off. They decapitate. But instead of getting blood, instead of getting gore, like you say, you get this kind of fireworks. You get these bright colours, and it's all very exciting, and boom, boom, boom. And if you think about it, they've just decapitated hundreds of people, potentially thousands of people. But this is all treated like one big joke.
Yeah.
And it's just this kind of moral desensitization that's at play here. It just kind of, who's watching this film? What the hell is a 12-year-old going to be making of all this? I mean, like you say, some of them maybe are just going to take it as completely over the top and not take it seriously, and I would hope so, because that means that they won't be disturbed by it. And I imagine some of them are going to be disturbed by it, aren't they?
I would imagine so. I mean, especially for the younger demographics within that target audience. But even, I would venture to say that even if someone isn't consciously disturbed by it and sees it as being over the top and completely fantastical and having nothing to do with reality at all, I think it would still, serve to have some kind of impact on them, because at the end of the day, when you're watching a film, your consciousness is still in that film. You're still in that world. You're taking in all the stimuli, and when it comes to this kind of violence, where it's put across as being as being trivial, as being completely inconsequential. I still think it is going to have some kind of impact on the subconscious, because it is what it is at the end of the day. And I think it would still serve to desensitize people, and especially those younger members of the audience. And this is, again, the film is just absolutely replete with this completely sensationalistic, over-the-top violence being put across in a very lighthearted, trivial manner. And I've got real questions about why that was done and about what impact or effect it would have, or it was intended to have. And I tend to intuit that there's something a little bit more insidious going on than just meaningless, laughable violence. I think that's probably
something more meaningful going on and more significant going on than just this was the way they got it past the censor, was by making it seem like lighthearted and jovial. I think there is more to it than that. Because you do get that with films where they do sometimes actually have to change the tone of certain scenes in order to get past a censorship board, but actually, as a consequence of that, make the film more disturbing than it began. But I don't think that's what we're seeing in this case. I think this is clearly a stylistic element. This is something quite deliberate and conscious that they're doing there. And it does make me wonder. I think about this kind of thing a lot, Back in the days, assuming this actually happened, but back in the days when we lived in caves or nomadic tribes or whatever, we had to use violence in order to catch food, right? In order to kill animals to eat. But that adjusted people quite well to violence, because they understood you only use it as a necessary means of, perpetuating your own survival. And that's not a bad reason to use violence, to be honest, because, otherwise you die. So it's a non-starter, the argument against that. But these days, people live in essentially unviolent societies, or at least where they don't have to kill in order to eat. And yet they're surrounded by the same imagery of violence in computer games, in films, and so on. And I think some of the time that can actually be healthy, perhaps even a good thing. That, if you like, because teenage boys are spending their time killing the Russians on Call of Duty, they're not out beating someone up on the street. I mean, that's a simplification, but you know what I'm saying there.
Yeah,
you could make that argument that it's having that effect, but it is also having the effect of constantly stimulating that, those parts of the brain that recognize violence, that recognize the destruction of flesh, that recognize blood, and know what it represents and know what it is. They're stimulating those parts of the brain, but without the associated physical experience of actually, throwing a spear and catching a rabbit or something. So you don't have the real experience. It completely maladjusts you to what violence actually is.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point, actually. I'd not thought about that in the context of this film, but it's
you thought along these sorts of lines.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because you've got the whole issue of as you said, we're living in a society now where violence is not actually required on a day-to-day basis for survival, and so because we do still have these primitive, primordial drives within us in regards to violence. That needs an outlet of some sort. We need to be able to explore that and to express that, at least on a psychological level. Yeah. And so, all the violence that we're surrounded with in media and popular culture is kind of a surrogate in a sense. We can sort of experience that violence and sort of explore our own violent tendencies and drives in a vicarious sense. But the way in which it's being presented, for the most part, and especially in films like this, is without a justified moral context of any sort. We're not given, we're not, as you said, we're not given the context for the violence in terms of why it is really necessary. And I mean, I think even if we go back to older films, which weren't so gratuitously violent, we would see that the violence was used for a purpose. It was used as a last resort in a scenario where it was required for survival, and that would be it. Whereas in this film, it is. I mean, it's the solution to pretty much every problem that arises in this film is gratuitous violence. I don't think there are any. Whether there are very few sort of problems or scenarios which are resolved in any other method than violence.
Well, and everything in the film is a weapon.
Yeah.
A lighter is a cigarette lighter is actually a hand grenade. I don't know. Watches fire out darts. He's got an umbrella that is bulletproof and can fire a variety of projectiles depending on what he needs it to do. There's a bit where someone gets killed with some 1815 Napoleonic brandy. There's everything in the film, pretty much, at some point, is used as some sort of weapon. And
Q Branch on steroids, yeah.
No, it really is, though.
Yeah.
And it does lead you to wonder that they have... I mean, here's another question that comes out of this. Do you think that this generation of filmmakers, people who aren't necessarily that older than me and you, I mean, the guy who made this film was maybe only 10 or 12 years older than likes of me and you. He's not necessarily our generation, but he's not that far off. Do you think they're suffering from if not necessarily a desensitization towards violence, because I don't think that's strictly what's going on in this film, because it's not like the violence is really brutal. It's more a trivialization, a joviality towards violence. And that just comes from a warped sense of, well, what are the reasons for violence, or at least what are the rational reasons for violence, and what are the consequences of it? Because neither of those are put into the film. Only the violence itself, which is treated as this exciting, funny thing, is all treated as a joke. So do you think the filmmakers themselves are suffering from this a bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely possible. I don't know a hell of a lot about the director here, but I mean, it's certainly a possibility. I think perhaps one of the other perhaps, sort of driving influences behind all of this violence, behind the trivial, light-hearted manner in which it's put across is I don't know, something to do with this kind of stoic British attitude towards things, where nothing is portrayed as having any true emotional consequences, It's sort of, just get the job done.
Stiff up a lip.
Stiff up a lip, and so regardless of how shocking, traumatic, awful it may be, it's very good then, well, we got the job done, didn't we? And, I sort of pick up on a bit of that attitude, I think, with this film. And, I think that could very well explain, the attitude to a lot of this violence that's being portrayed. And it's this sort of classic British stoicism, mixed with the methods and ideologies of a spy, and that, there can't be any real moral or emotional consequences for anything. It's just about achieving the objective, completing the mission, getting the job done. Very good. Move on,
Ends justify the means once more.
Yeah.
That very much is the underlying philosophy in a lot of ways of the film. But one of the other major dimensions to this upper class, like you say, not necessarily British stoicism, but certainly upper class British culture, is of course the Darwinistic and transhumanist stuff that goes on.
Oh, yeah.
Constantly, again, in this film. I mean, we keep saying that these things are all the way throughout the film, but that's because they really are. When you watch the film, you're completely battered from pillar to post. It's like one moment you're watching ultraviolence, the next moment you're watching a dialogue about some sort of eugenicist plot to wipe out most of humanity. The next you're seeing some outrageous piece of technology, and then you're back to some ultraviolence. And then, but yeah, this is something that really, really comes across, because both the heroes and the villains are eugenicists of sorts. You have Eggsy, obviously, is recruited into the secret society. And as Colin Firth is recruiting him, well, actually, no, let's skip back to even earlier than that. When the character who is killed by the Blade Runner girl right at the start of the film, he has to be replaced in Kingsman. And so all of these people go out and select their candidates, and that's why we get this training and testing process. But at the start of that, Colin Firth and Michael Caine, who plays the head of this Kingsman society, they're having this little conversation about the last guy that Colin Firth brought into Kingsman and how he didn't really work out because he wasn't one of us, i.e. he wasn't really posh, he wasn't posh of blood. And Colin Firth kind of fires back something like, the world is evolving. There's a reason that aristocrats developed weak chins. So he is saying to him, actually, we need the genes in order to survive. It's very crude, I suppose, in that respect, that saying that, centuries of inbreeding ended up with aristocrats actually ending up with really, really poor health. It's one of those things that threatened them, in fact, was that notion that we can't go outside of our own breeding stock or whatever. And yet he's saying to him, no, we have to. And then when he's actually recruiting Eggsy, he tells him quite explicitly that it doesn't matter what his background is, because he can be taught to become something else. He can be taught to become an upper-class gentleman spy. And he says, if you're prepared to adapt and learn, you can transform. So we get both of it, don't we? We get both the crude Darwinistic side and the more sophisticated transhumanist side. But I know you wanted to talk about the Samuel L. Jackson character, this maniac eco-eugenicist.
Yeah.
Would that be a fair description of him? Because he has a ultimately very similar philosophy, doesn't he?
Yeah. I think what really struck me about this is that, again, we're seeing a film which is touching on so many of the predominant themes within sort of, conspiracy culture and alternative media dialogue, in that the villain in this film is, this eccentric, eco-frenetic villain whose plan is to, well, actually, I'll backtrack a bit. His whole philosophy is that, he says that all the governments of the world are concerned about climate change, and they're all worried about the fact that the polar ice caps are going to melt and are going to be flooded and all this kind of stuff. But they've actually got it wrong, he says, because what's really happening is that the Earth is simply overpopulated. That is the real problem here. And what we really need to do to solve this problem is to, just simply wipe out the, most of the Earth's population. So again, we're talking about, very, very well-established themes within alternative media culture, with Agenda 21, Georgia Guidestones, all that kind of stuff, which people will no doubt be familiar with. And not only that, but he is a billionaire, industrialist, philanthropist type character. And so his
basically Bill Gates.
Yeah, he's Bill Gates, basically. So his method in bringing about this massive population cull is to give the whole world's population a free SIM card, because he's running some kind of cell phone IT blue chip company. It's like some sort of Silicon Valley type company. One of these Google or AT&T or whatever. And so his plan is to advertise and promote this stuff. Get the whole world to accept one of these free SIM cards, which is going to give them free calls, free texts, blah, 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 forever. And so when he does that, his plan is to, once the SIM cards are in everybody's phones, they're going to send out some kind of psychotronic warfare signal, sort of, like a mind control radio wave, that kind of thing.
Anger tone or something. Yeah. Violence, music.
Yeah. Whatever it is, it's, a very, very clear reference, again, to something that, the types of concepts that pop up in conspiracy culture with, CIA, MK Ultra, all of these different types of things, that people will be familiar with. And, this SIM card will send this tone out. Everyone will basically go crazy and will kill each other off. And there's something quite sinister in that as well. And sort of, but, obviously there's something sinister in it, but there's something a bit deeper and more, insidious than would appear at first. But,
and one of the things that I found interesting about the character, the Samuel L. Jackson one, the guy who's plotting all of this, is that he himself can't stand the sight of blood. That he himself...
Well, that's what I was just about to get to. Yeah.
He doesn't want to kill anyone himself.
He doesn't want to do the dirty work, yeah.
He wants to get everyone else to kill each other. And that's like the most... I hesitate to use the word beautifully, but the most outrageously misanthropic view of the world. That, humanity is a virus, and the best way to eradicate the virus is to get it to kill itself. That it's so horrible, we can get it to just kill itself.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting at, actually. Yeah, that's exactly it.
And that goes even beyond the eugenics of the Kingsman. That's like insanity. It's just total insanity.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, so
what is that doing in this film? To be honest,
yeah, I mean that's a bit of a mind job, that one.
It is. I'm not necessarily expecting you to have an answer, but it is.
Yeah.
They've pushed it again. They've pushed it so far. It's not just that they're talking about global warming, which is like an idea that turns up in plenty of films anyway. They're not just talking about the really catastrophic, devastating climate change version. They've gone beyond that. They've said it's not even about greenhouse effect. It's not even about carbon emissions or any of that. It's that humanity itself is the problem. Humanity itself needs to be eradicated. And I know
Club of Rome.
Well, yeah, I know sort of extremist eugenicist and extremist eco people have said these things, but they're not something that tends to turn up in. I mean, it's like there's none of this in The Day After Tomorrow. That's all just about it's because we polluted the atmosphere and now it's all gone to shit. But this notion that humanity itself, that it would be desirable for it to wipe itself out by everyone killing each other, it is a dark, dark vision for a film that is so, like you say, so light-hearted, and certainly that promoted itself as essentially a comedy. So, again, we've got to ask, I know what the answer is going to be from you. We've got to hammer it home to everyone listening. Comedy is perhaps the most powerful Trojan horse that can be used in these kinds of entertainment. Because when you're laughing, you switch off. Your defenses go away. All of your natural instincts of, oh, hang on, there's something there that I need to stop and think about before I go any further and before I respond. All of that goes away because you're too busy caught up in the humour of it all and the enjoyment of it all. And this film, though I didn't find it particularly funny.
No.
You didn't really, on the whole.
No.
I mean,
no.
I know you were saying before when we were discussing our very initial reactions to this film, you mostly found it just really disturbing and unpleasant. I just found it profoundly confusing as to, well, who are we supposed to be rooting for? What are we supposed to be rooting for? Who are we identifying with? Which of this massive rainbow of ideas are we supposed to take on board? You know?
Yeah.
But over time, I've come around more to your reaction. I actually feel this is quite a disgusting film. And
it is.
And I think the best illustration of that is the very ending of the film. The scene that we haven't talked about yet with the Swedish princess.
Oh, yes.
And I think this is probably where we'll more or less round off our discussion of the film itself. There's another thing that we want to talk about as well. But, okay, so how do we explain this? Right. Samuel L. Jackson's character has kidnapped all of the rich and celebrity people who won't sign up to his scheme and won't be part of his genocidal world domination plan. So they're all locked up in a prison underneath his mountain lair. Where else? And one of them is a Swedish princess. The Swedish Prime Minister, who appears to be based on Carl Bildt, the Bilderberger, Carl Bildt, he goes along with it, but the princess, the royal family, she doesn't. So when Eggsy is running around this mountain lair trying to take out the bad guy and save the world, he, of course, happens to be right outside her jail cell, of all the hundreds down there. And she knocks on the door and he takes down the little, whatever, eye flap thing that the prison door has and talks to her. And she says, oh, get me out of here, get me out of here. And he says something cheeky like, oh, will I get a kiss if I get you out of here? And she says, I'll give you a whole lot more than that. And he sort of, I'll be right back. And goes off and saves the world and then comes back. In the version you saw, it was slightly different. In that in that dialogue, I mean, talking about that first little exchange between them, correct me if I'm wrong here, she explicitly, in the version you saw, or quite explicitly, offers him anal sex.
Yeah. There are basically what there seem to be is that there's two cuts of the film, and I think what's happened here is one of the cuts has been floated in some cinemas, and then the parents have complained and they've done another cut. If not that, they've done two cuts in the first place. But regardless, yeah, scenario in which you feel where it's, oh, I'll do anything you want, or I'll do a lot more than that. But the one that I saw initially, and this is the one that was in cinemas, she makes a very direct, unequivocal offer of anal sex to him. And so he's, like, okay then, right? He rushes off. And, I think in the cut that you are referencing there, which I think is probably the second cut, when he returns to her jail cell and gets in there, we don't really see anything too explicit. It's just kind of inferred that, okay, they're off to go and have some romance or sex or whatever. It's
well, I think it is quite a subtle difference between, in the second scene, in the version I saw, there is no reference in that dialogue to sex at all, really. She just sort of says, yeah, I'll offer you a lot more than a kiss. But they never explicitly mention anything, and he just runs off to save the world. He then comes back, having saved the world. He's got a bottle of champagne with him, James Bond style. And he gets the guy back on the plane, give him the door code for the prison, for the jail cell. Goes in there, and he's still wearing the glasses, Tom Cruise style, from Mission Impossible, the glasses with the camera built in. And the guy back on the plane is watching all this on a screen, and he sees the princess kind of rolling over in bed and smiling over her shoulder, and then Eggsy takes the glasses off and kind of throws them across the room, and so you see the perspective of them just sort of flying across the bed and you can't see anything. In the version you saw, it's practically pornographic.
Well, yeah, but that's basically what it is, because in the version that I saw at first was, I think, the scene that you just talked about there where you've got the Mark Strong Merlin character looking through the glasses at what Eggsy's doing. We just see her lying on her stomach and sort of looking back over her shoulder, smiling. But in the version I saw, the shot continues and pans down to a bare bottom, spread and ready for action. I mean, sorry to be crude, it's the only way I can explain it.
No, sure. It's a perfect description. That's
exactly what it is.
The shot that you see in there.
Yeah, and so in the version I saw, we've got a direct verbal explicit reference to what she's offering, and then a graphic illustration of exactly what's about to happen. And it is essentially pornographic. I mean, they leave absolutely no doubt in your mind whatsoever as to what's about to happen there. Whereas in the version that you saw, it's a little bit more is left to the imagination.
It's a bit more
traditional.
Yeah,
but softer, a bit more coy, a bit more. Yeah, I suppose like your sort of traditional action movie where it's not explicit, but we get the picture. And that's all that really needs to be said. And so I mean, but that in itself that was a real shocker. That was the moment in the film where I went, what the fuck? I was just like...
Not just from the sound of things, to be honest. This has been brought up quite a lot in the reviews and discussion about this film. Quite a lot of people have pointed to that and gone, hang on.
Yeah. What's this doing in here?
That's not the ending I was expecting.
No. But from what I've heard, a friend of mine saw this in the cinema before I did, and he said that, and at that particular scene, a number of women with children just got up and walked out. And this is 2 minutes away from the end of the film. But at that point, they were like, no more. This is what the hell is this doing here? So, and as you say, this has come up in other reviews on the internet and such. But that was a big shock moment. I really wasn't expecting that. And I've got some interesting ideas as to why that was put in there and how that fits in with some of the other threads in the film. And when I talk again, if we go back to the beginning, my comment about it being a major upgrade, I think that particular scene was probably what prompted that statement more than anything else.
I was tempted to make a joke there, but I won't. But there is an underlying point here, though, and that's that Eggsy has basically never met this girl. He meets her once, has a very brief conversation, runs off and has a fight wherein he kills a few people, and then he comes back and she's, here we go, here's my bum, let's get on with it. And why? This was always the thing that bothered me about that whole storyline, not just the scene that wasn't actually in the version that I saw, but that whole storyline is, why doesn't he end up with the girl? The girl who joins Kingsman, who he has been talking to and friendly with throughout the whole film. They've been through a lot together, they're working together, there's every reason for them to get together. And in any other spy film, that would be who he gets together with. But no, they just leave her to one side and say, oh, let's just throw this Swedish princess in there and have him fuck her up the arse. I mean, it's like they're trying to slap you about the face with this, we're really trying to desensitize your kids towards meaningful relationships. We're just trying to get them to think that sex is what matters. And whether you get that by doing a Swedish girl up the bum or drugging someone with Rohypnol or tricking them with neuro-linguistic programming, that's all there is. Well, there's no romance, there's no anything. That's all there is.
Well, yeah, that's exactly what's going on because, in any, not just in any other spy film, but I would argue in any other film period, there would be that they would opt for the establishment of a relationship in which the girl and the guy get to know each other throughout the film. Perhaps one saves the other, and get together at the end. And it's a relationship with some kind of context, with some kind of substance. It's got some kind of emotional substance to it. And they're sort of substituting that for just for casual sex, and not just for casual sex, but for casual anal sex. I mean. What kind of message is that sending to children? It's pretty clear, isn't it? As you say, whether it be NLP or, being able to do a Swedish princess up the bum because you've just gone and saved her from death. you know, it's pretty ugly. You know, I found it pretty ugly. You know,
even though the bottom itself is quite beautiful.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no argument there, but I mean, you know, I mean, it's yeah, I mean, that's another way in which, you know, you can get people to accept and identify, or at least not complain about these things. Is that oh well, we're getting a bit of TNA, you know, we're getting a bit of skin, so we're not going to complain. And of course, all the teenage boys who have gone to see this film at the cinema will have no problem with that whatsoever.
Oh, they will have loved that scene, yeah.
Yeah. But again, the underlying moral, social message here is one that is it's pretty debased, really. And it's probably the only way I can really put it. It's a very, very debased set of messages regarding sex and relationships and all that kind of stuff. So,
to try and put a more positive spin on this, because we have been kind of justifiably weirded out by this film, and we both have a pretty disgusted reaction to it. But at least we can say that all those people who went to see the film, and that was the point that they walked out, part of me does say, you didn't walk out earlier?
Yeah.
But the other part of me says, at least after 2 hours of watching that, you weren't so messed up by it that you just thought, oh, this is okay, this is just a normal way for the film to end. Well, at least some people had the reaction of, no, hang on, they've absolutely crossed a line there. I might have been a bit concerned about some of the other stuff in this film, but that was just a massive fuck you to anyone in the audience who actually has any morals.
Yeah.
And so at least some people walked out at that point, and at least some people, you know what I mean? Because films wear you down, and by the end of them, accept anything.
That's a very good point, actually. And I suppose the silver lining to all of this, if there is one. And you know, throughout this film, we're pushed and pushed and pushed, and the boundaries and are just pushed, and the envelope is expanded, and as you say, we're worn down, and we're just getting more and more and more and more. And yet, despite all of that, despite being pushed and despite being desensitized throughout the film, there's still, you know, a significant number of people. Hold on, this crosses the line. This is a bridge too far.
I'm not letting my kids watch this. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, so despite what they've done in this film and trying to wear you down and trying to, I guess, prepare you for this ultimate finale scenario at the end, you know, people still were, you know, conscious enough to say, hang on, this is, you know, one of these things doesn't fit here. This is, you know, this shouldn't
not
be
right.
here. This is it's unpalatable, unsuitable, inappropriate. And so, I mean, I guess that would be something positive to take away from it, because it is a very, very powerful film. And it's, through this whole, as you said, the Trojan and horse comedy technique of just getting you to laugh and put your defenses and your guard down completely and accept anything. Despite all of that, people were still conscious enough to say no, or to at least have some kind of objection to it. So, yeah.
And I mean, before we move on to the final, I guess, question in all of this, is there anything else you want to say about the film? I guess we've covered quite a lot, to be fair. So I mean, okay. But is there anything else you want to just bring up?
Yeah, I mean, one little sort of, I mean, again, as we said, this is such a dense film, and we could talk about it for 3 hours, and we'd still only be covering a fraction of it, really. But one of the things, a little nugget I just sort of that came to mind before when you were talking about the whole sort of context in which this Swedish princess is imprisoned, was that we mentioned the fact that the Swedish Prime Minister goes along with it, but the Swedish princess, you know, the representative of the royal family, does not. And so we're given a kind of an association there about royalty, which is, I find, kind of interesting in the context of the film, because we've got the whole scenario of it's Kingsman, so it's making a reference to royalty there. That was set up by a bunch of,
at least
oligarchs.
Aristocrats.
Yeah, aristocrats or royalty or whoever. And they take a very, I suppose, a view and a philosophy that would definitely be in keeping with what we know of, you know, royal and aristocratic views. And, you know, the film essentially, I guess, advocates royalty in some way or another. And we've got this whole scenario whereby we're presented with the Swedish princess being the one who says no. And who doesn't go along with the plan. So it's kind of I'm not sure how consequential this is, but it's just a little thing I picked up on in terms of presenting the member of the royal family as being someone who was morally upright, who was doing the noble thing, who was, you know, going to go along with imprisonment rather than go along with this awful plan. And so, I think that's another little.
interesting observation. Here's what I'm make of it, because I had not thought about that. Off the top of my head, does that mean what they're offering us is... Because we're faced with a series of choices throughout the movie as to who we identify with, and therefore which of this variety of horrible ideas we identify with. But with this particular thing, we're given the impression of either the aristocracy and the royalty are a good, noble, necessary institution that maintains our country's security and keeps us stable, or we're given the idea that royalty is exciting and dissident and sexy and maybe even a bit progressive and a bit, up to date and modern. Well, so kind of given both perspectives.
Well, that's exactly what I was just about to say. And this fits in with as you described, the dense melange of ideas in this film. We're asking ourselves, who are we supposed to identify with here? What ideas are we supposed to identify with? What messages are we supposed to take away? Who is the force of good here? I mean, and it's kind of a lot of different things. And I suppose in that particular context, we are being given both messages. So it's both the former and the latter, that they are noble, they are righteous, they are moral, they are, a force for good in the world, but also that they are progressive, that they are forward thinking, that they're cool, that they're up to date, contemporary, sexy, all of these things. So it's both things there. It's sort of, it's almost a synthesis of two views on royalty, in a sense, I suppose, isn't it?
Or it's kind of the two different sorts of PR that we actually get about real royalty. I mean, talking certainly in Britain anyway, you're kind of offered the old, the Queen and Prince Philip and the Queen Mother and all of that, and isn't it great to have this proud tradition? But then you're also given the, Charles and Diana and Will and Kate, and it's all like fucking soap opera. And
yes. Yeah, exactly.
So I think it reflects that, perhaps, to a large extent, as everything in this film actually seems to reflect a lot about the real British aristocracy and the real British old establishment. They actually, despite disguising it behind all kinds of weird technology and daft storylines and so on, they actually got a lot right, I think. Anyway, the question, of course, that we always ask with these films, was it state-sponsored? I know this is something you suspected from quite early on, actually, from knowing about this film. You thought, there's a possibility here. And it looks, at least in some respects, it's absolutely right that it was. And it looks in some other ways like perhaps leading back to even the intelligence services. But just to run all this down for people, the origin of the film, where this film came from, was that the director, whose name escapes me right now, was originally slated to be the director of Casino Royale, the James Bond reboot from 2006, but for whatever reason didn't get that job. But he was talking to Mark Miller, the comic book author who wrote Kingsman, and they were discussing this story from way back in the day in the 60s when they were originally making the Bond films. And Ian Fleming, the author, wanted a very posh Bond. He wanted an upper-class gentleman spy. He wanted someone like Noel Coward. But the producers went with Sean Connery, of course, who is much more rugged, much more working class, much more normal, if you like. And so the problem was, Sean Connery was a bit of a rough Scottish ex-Navy guy. And so they had to clean him up, they had to get him to talk properly, they had to basically turn him into more of a gentleman. Not just to placate Fleming, but also because that was what the script called for, and that's what they were trying to turn Sean Connery into. And so that's where the idea of Kingsman came from, of taking this rough working class lad and turning him into a gentleman spy. So, even in the origin of the movie, you have a hint back to that sort of thing, and that tradition of state-sponsored movies. But talking specifically about this film, about Kingsman, if you go through the credits, which I always advise people to do when you're trying to look for this sort of information, there are two different military contractors that are mentioned in the thanks. One is called MBDA Missile Systems, and the other is called Inmarsat. I don't know what either of them really do, but it's just interesting that this film thanked these companies, given their business. So, were they just involved in, providing a bit of equipment, or were they perhaps involved in providing some script consultancy or something like that? It's a distinct possibility, I feel. Similarly, the people who produced all this, they're all involved in, like, comic book action hero stuff, which is an area of entertainment which the Department of Defense in particular has been very, very, very much involved in. So I get the impression at least some of these people have brushed up against the DoD. If I'm not 100% sure whether they've ever actually worked on a proper, officially recognized DoD movie, but nonetheless, they move in those circles, they live in that world. But the biggest hint, by far, or at least the biggest lead that we got on all of this, is in a scene very early on in the film where Eggsy, the protagonist, is arrested for stealing a car and going joyriding in it, in a really, I thought, quite stupid sequence with the car, and he's driving backwards, and you've got the Dizzy Rascal playing, and
Yeah.
I really didn't kind of buy into that at all, but I know certain people absolutely would. Anyway, so he's taken to the police station, and he phones up the number for Kingsman, which he got on a medal when he was a tiny little kid, and tells them he's in trouble and that he needs to get out of it. And within minutes, he is set free, right? So clearly Kingsman exists way above the police in the pecking order, in the hierarchy, that they can just make a phone call and say, let this kid go, and that's that. But the scene is filmed at the real-life Holborn police station, which is a real-life police station in London. And I wondered, looking at it, it wasn't possible for them to have done this without having permission. But yet the Metropolitan Police, the people who own that and run that police station, are not credited in any way at the end of the film. And Adam, both of us saw this as something a little odd, because it's so explicit that that's the police station that it is. And all they'd have to say is, the producers would like to thank the Metropolitan Police Service. So why not mention it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's I'm sure we'll get into our thoughts on why not. But yeah, it is very interesting. I think one of the things that comes to mind in this context is that when we're talking about the possibility of it being state sponsored, we've got to take into account that this is a British film, and the paper trail between government organizations and such and the film industry is not as clear cut as it is in places like the US, where we can get, the lists of films that, the Department of Defense has been working on through the FOIA request and such. It's very difficult to come across things like that in the UK. But, I intuitively felt that just due to the nature of this film, due to the fact that it was about espionage and spies and contained all of these relevant themes, that, I wouldn't be surprised at all if it did have some kind of connection to some kind of state agency, and if not a state agency, some kind of other think tank or, organization in regards to casting, scripting, other sort of, injecting certain themes into the storyboard, that kind of thing. And
we know that state agencies have been involved in doing that in that kind of quasi-deniable way.
Well, yeah. And so I guess this leads us on to the only sort of, actual paper trail we have come across, and what that might be inferring in terms of what little information we did manage to glean. So if you want to tell the audience about what you managed to get, Tom.
Well, I filed a Freedom of Information request with the Metropolitan Police saying, one of your police stations appears in this film, but you aren't thanked at the end of it, so I would like any documents you have on the assistance that you gave to this film. And they admitted they did have a bunch of stuff. They do have a whole bunch of stuff. And so they got back to me and said, we can confirm, we do hold records about this, but that it had to be put through a special public interest test, which essentially, if there are certain problems with releasing material, they have to go through an evaluation where they say, is it more in the public interest to release this, or are the concerns sufficient that we can say no? And almost invariably they say no. Obviously. And so ultimately they got back to me and said, we're not sending you anything. But what it does confirm, of course, is that the Metropolitan Police were involved in the making of this film. We kind of knew that already, but there is no doubt. They certainly were. But the question is, if all they've got is one day's worth of filming on the steps outside one police station, why couldn't they release that? Yeah. Unless they were involved in more, why couldn't they release that? I mean, the reasons they gave, I forwarded this email to you, Adam, and it is a long and slightly, well, not slightly, very tedious email, but I will stick a PDF copy of it up on my site just in case anyone wants to read it. But the reasons they gave, it's all about commercial confidentiality and, oh, we might be able to figure out security precautions that these people take and it might put these celebrities at risk and stuff like that. And it was a load of bollocks, really, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was a complete load of bollocks. I mean, basically, it's a very long, convoluted email, and the officer who returned contact with you towards the end of the email gives three, I think it was four different,
3 or 4,
reasons for why they were unable to disclose the information. And for the most part, what I got from all of that was just security. And I'm thinking, well, okay, on paper, at face value, this is a ridiculous, over the top action comedy film about spies. Now, if that is the case, and if there's nothing more to it than that, and if the Metropolitan Police were only involved in allowing the producers to, film on location, and it's just, it's about 2 minutes of the film. If
it can't be more than a day or two of filming. Yeah.
Yeah. Why all the secrecy? What is the concern? I mean, what is going on here? Why are they unwilling to disclose this information? What could possibly go wrong with that? Unless there is more involvement in that. And, one of the possibilities we discussed, Tom, was that what may have been the case, and of course this is pure speculation, but it kind of stands to reason for me, is that there may have been other parties involved that were involved with the film under the auspices of the Metropolitan Police. So we may have had representatives, advisors, consultants from perhaps organizations like MI5 or other security organizations, or perhaps even, private think tanks and such. They could be involved with the film for any number of reasons. And in revealing their own records about their participation in the film, they may have been unable to redact or hide the fact that these other organizations who wish to remain anonymous were actually involved in the film. And again, speculation, but it's one of the. I think we both agree that we could only come to that conclusion, or possibly the alternative, in being that it was just institutional secrecy.
Well, I was going to say I am somewhat torn on this one between, is this just the Met Police being typically, they don't tend to give you anything, they just don't like answering FOIA requests, basically, so they ditch it around and then do this and say no. And that's a possibility, but it just seems so trivial. This isn't like when I was asking for stuff to do with 7/7. I can understand why they just wouldn't give me stuff on that, even stuff that they'd kind of already released in some formats and stuff like that. But no. I can kind of get, I never really expected those requests to come back. But with this, we're always told it's just entertainment. It's just a movie. Well, clearly it's not just fucking movie, is it? Because the Met Police are involved in some way with it, but are being very tight-lipped and secretive about what that was. So that's not just a movie.
No. There are obviously more connotations there, and there's more significance there. And one could say that the silence speaks volumes, at least about the fact that the involvement, whatever it was much more in depth than they're letting on, and that they have, very specific reasons and very particular concerns about disclosing information and their involvement in the film. And again, if it's just a silly spy action comedy, and all they did was allow the producers to film their police station for a minute or two, then why all the secrecy?
Who cares?
It just doesn't. Who the hell cares? What could they possibly be disclosing that could possibly be of any real threat or concern to anybody at all, if that is indeed the case? And again, I think, well, obviously that's not the case then, is it? Okay, the whole institutional secrecy thing and them just, not wanting to give away anything at all it's plausible, and it is possible. And, you've got to concede that may well be the case. But yeah.
On the other hand, if you go through the FOIA logs for the Met Police, they do release some stuff. It's not like they've never responded positively to a FOIA request, and some of this stuff I can't think of any great example off the top of my head, but it's something it's one of those things you can get hold of, is a log of all FOIA requests and whether they responded by releasing stuff or not. And I remember seeing stuff in that would be way more controversial than this, unless there is something in this that obviously would be more controversial. But yeah, I just wonder, What is it
Yeah.
they're hiding? Because they're hiding something, and whenever a security service hides something, you do start to wonder what the hell they're up to. But
Yeah.
I guess we should round this one off, really, Adam. I think we have done justice to this film and what it's all about. But is there anything you want to say in summing up? I mean, it's hard to sum up. But is there anything you want to say?
Yeah, there's absolutely no concise summary of this film. But I guess if I was to I could leave the listeners with one kind of final thought, I would say that this film is psychological warfare, and it's more sophisticated than I'd seen in any other films, I think. I mean, there may be some exceptions to that rule, but I definitely felt that this was quite advanced psychological warfare, for all the reasons that we've talked about and many more if people watch the film. And so when we talk about the possibility of, state involvement, and most especially in terms of intelligence agencies who happen to specialize in psychological warfare, it does seem to paint a kind of something of a picture there. And, although we don't have any, hard evidence of this being the case, I would tend to err on the side of this being, assisted and, or sponsored by, some kind of state agency, whether it's just the police or whether it's intelligence agencies or private think tanks. I don't know. But yeah, I think this is quite a sinister film, quite a disturbing film. And, I would encourage anybody to watch it with their with their utmost of discernment. Put your mental filters all the way up for this one.
Yes, put your guard up. Yeah,
it's worrying, and we're both now. I think obviously there's never been a dispute. I think we both agree now that this is quite a worrying, insidious film. And the fact that it's been marketed to children and young people in the way it has is all the more concerning. So yeah, I think if I was to leave the audience with anything, it would be that.
Well, I want to leave people with just one thought, and that is, in the sequence we're talking about where Eggsy is at the police station, what is it that happens? The police get a phone call from higher-ups telling them to do something. Is that in itself a metaphor for the state involvement in this film?
Wow, there we go. Interesting.
I thought you'd like that one, Adam. But
well, it's just like that scene in the elevator. How deep does it go? Deep enough. Similar kind of thing going on there. Yes.
So, yeah, something for people to wonder about, because frankly, they're not going to give us the information, so we won't get a solid answer. But there are certainly reasons, strong ones, to suspect that. But I guess all that's left to say is thanks once again for this recommendation. It has been a fascinating, if rather troubling, film to watch and to dissect and to try and figure out, and it's taken us a while to really get a handle on it, but I think it's been worth it. It's been fascinating to do this. So yeah, thanks again, and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
No, as always, Tom, pleasure to be on the show, and hope the audience got something out of this. But I look forward to our next discussion.
So that was my conversation with Adam on Kingsman, and to get his podcast, Themes and Memes, you should check into tmpodcast.com. And of course, for more of my stuff, you should check into spyculture.com, where you can download this podcast and every other episode of ClandesTime. I will invite you to consider supporting my work by buying a copy of my book or a digital download, and I will of course thank those who have done so since last time. You can also subscribe to my site to get every update that I post there, via email with the subscribe button in the bottom right-hand corner, or if you go to spyculture.com/subscribe, then you'll get all of the options for following my work, including subscribing to this podcast via RSS feed, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn. All of that is at spyculture.com/subscribe. As always, I hope you got something out of this episode, and feel free to let me know what you think of the film, and of course of what we had to say about it. In the meantime, I am Tom Secker, and you've been listening to ClandesTime. So thanks for listening, and until the next installment, take care.
You play the guitar on that's his own hair. The little faggot got his own jet airplane. The little faggot, he's a millionaire. We got to install microwave oven, custom kitchen deliveries. We got to move these refrigerators. We got to move these color TVs. Move on. Mama, she got it sticking in the cameraman. We could have some. And he's up there. What's that? Hawaiian noises. He's banging on the bongos like a chimpanzee. Oh, that ain't working. That's the way you do it. Get your money for nothing. Get your chicks for free. We got to install microwave oven, custom kitchen delivery. We got to move refrigerators. We got to move these color TVs. Listen here, now, that ain't working. That's the way you do it. You play the guitar on the MTV. That ain't working, that's the way you do it. Money for nothing and your chicks for free. Money for nothing, chicks for free. Money for nothing and your chicks for free. Ooh, that money for nothing, chicks for free. Money for nothing, chicks for free. All that money for nothing, chicks for free. Money for nothing, chicks for free. Money, easy chicks.